Go. Let's live. Okay. The Siyat D'Shmaya, Baruch Hashem. It's good to be back. We're holding in the Perek Daled. Okay, this Perek is one of the most unbelievable Prakim of the Tanya. As you see, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper into what mitzvahs do and how your neshama is coming through your machshava dibur and maisa, how your neshama is expressing through thought, speech, and action. And when you put on tefillin, you're literally, your soul at all of its levels are expressing itself in thought, speech, and action. And therefore, you're able to be totally enwrapped and enraptured in God's infinite light, because like we explained, that the garments of your soul are infinitely greater than your soul itself, because the garments of your soul of thought, speech, and action is when you can actually meet the undiluted will of Hashem. Because God said, learn the Torah by thinking about it. So when you actually activate your power of thought that can think about the words of Torah, you are tapping in to the Torah, which is God's infinite wisdom, and God and His wisdom are all one. You're able to enwrap yourself in God's undiluted essence. And when God said to speak words of Torah and to say brachos, and you use your speech to activate, so your words themselves become a meeting place with God's undiluted will. And when you do the mitzvahs themselves with all of the limbs of your body, kol atzmaisai, and you put on tzitzis, and you give tzedakah with your hand. So this action becomes a vessel that you're doing the undiluted will of God. When you give tzedakah, when you give charity, you give $100 to somebody in need. So this arm is literally engaged in undiluted will of God. Literally. That's greater than your soul, which is emanating from God, but it's not literally an undiluted will of God, so to speak. So it's infinitely greater. The soul, so to speak, is like a creation, whereas the Torah itself is the undiluted will of God. It's like meeting God Himself, so to speak. V'lachein. See in the middle of page 16, v'lachein, and therefore. And God did this in a way that we could all access Hashem's Torah. We could all access even the highest person to the lowest person. No matter what, no matter where a person is holding in his life, he can access undiluted meeting with God. No matter where you're up to. Everyone can say some words of Torah. Everybody can put on tefillin. Everybody can think words of Torah. Each one according to their level, and meet God. And therefore, therefore the Torah is compared to water. Just like water goes from a high place to a low place. If you want to find the water, don't go to the top of the mountain. It's going to be in the bottom, because water goes down to the lowest place. That's where you'll find the water. And the Torah is called water. So kach Torah yardem makom kavoida. So to the Torah goes from the highest place. She would sing v'chachmasa yisboah. What's the highest place spiritually? That's God's will itself. The Torah, which goes from the highest point, i.e. God and the Torah's will. The Torah, so to speak, goes down like water through all the spiritual worlds. And no one can say that he understands God fully. The highest place is where the Torah comes from. And the Torah comes down through all the spiritual worlds. The same Torah, umisham nasa v'yarda, and from that place, God Himself, the Hashem and the Torah are all one. From that place, the Torah comes down, what's called yarda v'seisra madregas, come down all sorts of hidden Kabbalistic ways. The Torah is coming and becoming more physicalized, even though the light of the Torah always remains the same. As it goes through all the four spiritual worlds, down. until the Torah can express herself literally as put on black boxes, as put on four-corner garments, as say the word Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, as think about God's unity, as give a coin to somebody in need. Even though what that looks like where it starts, you won't see coins up there in black boxes, you understand? Up there, it's undiluted God's will. As it comes down, the Torah starts taking a formation through the spiritual worlds, and it comes out, and you actually see as it expresses that you can actually hold on to it. You could write a Sefer Torah, which is a mitzvah. You could write a Sefer Torah with ink. You could do a bris milah with a knife you can hold in your hand. That's why there's all sorts of Kabbalistic kavanas of like what the knife is and the hand is and the kid and the all sorts of things. Because what that looks like up there is nifla. It's nifla, but it actually can come all the way down here. That you couldn't engage in. That's what you could stop a guy in the street and say, "Did you put on tefillin today?" And the guy can actually connect himself to the undiluted will of God. Mamish. The same will. A nifla thing. It's nifla. Unbelievable. Like we explained this before in the second parak, that what it looks like up there is totally spiritual, but it's the same thing, like we explained in the birth of a child, that the husband gives the seed, and all the potential of the child is in that seed. It's him. But in the seed, it is like a spiritual. If you took a microscope and look at the seed, you wouldn't see this kid there. But he's there. It's just in a different form. His information is there. But as the seed, so to speak, comes down the father's spine, like we explained, and it comes into the seed itself, and then it comes to the mother. And the mother takes that seed and unwinds it over 9 months. All of a sudden, now you see, wow, look what was there. And now he's a kid. This kid started like a thought in the mind of the father. So Hashem, so to speak, is the mind of the father. His thoughts is Torah. And that seed, i.e. the Torah, comes down through all the spiritual world, like the creation of the soul. But here it stays as an undiluted will, because God is saying, this is my will. So it's literally God inside the tefillin, inside the Torah. And it can come now, shenislab shebedvarim gashmin, turn into physical things, vinyana olam hazeh. Shem roiv mitzvahs ha-Torah. Have you not noticed that most of the mitzvahs are just totally physical things? Take an esrog and a palm branch. Yeah, might even have some dirt on it. And some willow that might even be a little wilty. And some hadas, some myrtle. And when you shake that, I'm telling you, when I saw Tzimar shake this year on day one, it was like insane. From the moment that it was like hours off, and the moment that he turned over he almost we're all even it's just a bunch of foliage. No, because God's will is take that, and you will change all the spiritual worlds, because God's there. That is called mind. It goes from the highest place to the lowest place. It's still mind. You didn't notice? It's still the same mind. It just went from the high place. Look, the Torah went from the highest place in God's consciousness to the lowest place into this world, but it's still God. It's going to give us a mushroom in the end. Let's just keep going for a moment. That you could write the 24 books of the Torah. You could write it with ink on a parchment made from an animal. It's the type of Gashmias. Esrim va'arba svarim shabat Torah nevim v'ksuvim kedei she'kol machshav tfisa behen. This was all done in that every person could have a connection to the Torah. The same 5-year-old who's reading Bereshis Bar Lakim, it's the same Bereshis Bar Lakim that Reb Chaim Kanievsky is learning at 93 years old. The same Bereshis, the same ink on a parchment. It's all there. But there's something there for the 5-year-old. That even those garments which are lower, i.e., than machshavah, lower than Torah, i.e., speaking and doing, the Torah is for everybody. You give your 3-year-old, like, take this lulav. Okay. It's just something for everybody at their level. For everybody. After we said that the Torah and the mitzvahs, they cloak, and you put all the 10 powers of your soul, which we explained earlier, into the mitzvahs, in the mitzvahs of thoughts and speech and action, all parts of your neshama can be activated and can be dressed in the Torah and the mitzvahs by thinking divrei Torah and saying divrei Torah and doing the mitzvahs with our actions. Your entire body becomes shining with God's light because you're literally engaging with God's light, His undiluted will. Your entire being is like bound up in the rock of life. You become totally bound up. The way this is generally used is when a person passes away from this world, we explain that the soul, that we say should be tzur b'tzur achayim. We should all live until 120 years. When we talk about a person going into the next world, we talk about that his soul should be bound up in God, like wrapped up, bound up. When the soul and the body leave and depart from one another, and the soul goes up there, it's going to come back in Chiyas HaMesim, but until then, it's going to be once wrapped up, so to speak, bound up with God. But here the Baal HaTanya is explaining how Pipinius right here, that when you do a Torah mitzvahs down here, you, in this world, your body can become totally enveloped with infinite light of God here. Mamish. Es Hashem mamish. Ve'or Hashem mamish. You hear that word mamish? But mamish. The Baal HaTanya is not saying mamish for no reason. It's saying, I'm not telling you a guzma. I'm not telling you, like sort of, you're like wrapped up like as an analogy. Mamish. Mamish, you are wrapped up with God because you're able to literally do a mitzvah with this hand. This hand can become completely filled with God consciousness. Look at God, infinite. Your hand, it only looks physical. But if you had the eyes to see it, this hand would be shining from one end of the world to the other. And after 120 years, you're going to see what your hands look like. You're going to see mamish, what your hand, what that means. You're going to see what your on top of gains. Really see what gains you have. God's light is totally surrounding. My rock, I will take refuge in you. That God, sin is like a shield that's on 3 sides. There's different types of shields that King David describes. This is a 3-sided shield. That it's a shield that we're going to battle like this. So it's saying that God, that shield, i.e. the mitzvahs, are that they literally, your light starts totally enveloping you. The shield is your hands doing mitzvahs. Tatren means surrounds, and sin is a shield. When I do your ratzon. Shuvat soine v'chachmase yisboach. Look at this, such a beautiful pshat. That's why it says it's more beautiful. One moment of tshuva and maisim tovim in this world, mikol chay olam haba. Then all of life in the world to come, one moment in this world is more beautiful, is more special. So what's the pshat? Rashi brings pshat in this chazal. The simple pshat is one moment in this world is more beautiful than all the world to come, is that in the world to come you can't do mitzvahs anymore. You can't earn anything anymore. And therefore, really the world to come is what we're what it's all about, when you're going to unleash all the spiritual relationship that you've been working on your whole life with God. But the only way to get there is if going through this world. So one moment is more than all the world to come, because this is the place you actually earn it. There you're actually going to have it. But here you can earn it. That's why when a person goes into a cemetery, we tuck on our tzitzis. Ein maligan ala mesim, because we can actually do a mitzvah here. You could put on tzitzis here. You know what somebody who passed away would do to put on tzitzis for a second? For 1 second? That's a simple shot. But what's the Balatanya saying? Look at this. The Balatanya is saying, no. It mamish means, not that this world is better because it's where you earn it. This world is better mamish, ki olam habahu shenenem ziv hashchina. In the world to come, it says that you enjoy the radiance of God's light, the radiance of the Shekhinah, shutanaga asaga, that the whole pleasure of the world to come is that you unleash, because you're not bound down by your physical body anymore, in the physical consciousness. You can unleash total God consciousness and the awareness. Because no creation, not even the malachim, ki im eza ha'ara me'or Hashem, no creation, not even the angels, can totally understand God. Because God's infinite. Even the greatest angels are all a creation. They have less finitude than stuff down here. They have more finitude. Thank you. They have more finitude. They have less. They have less finitude. They have less finitude than we down here. It's almost hard to distinguish them.
What's our aura?
A glow, a light, an orb. But do you understand, the world to come is all about understanding that light. But nobody could ever fully understand that light, not even the greatest angels. But that's the world to come. But in this world, when you could actually do a mitzvah, it's not about understanding. It's about making full contact with undiluted God will, which is God. That's what it means, Yafish Sha'achas. One moment in this world is actually better than all the world to come, because in this world you can access undiluted God experience that will not be able to be accessed in the world to come. Because there's no putting on tefillin in the world to come. The tzaddikim get this. That's why when I told you, like Tzimar, like before the Shak the Lulav was like literally an insane moment, because he was encountering God. In the world to come, you're going to see and understand the things that you were doing here. But imagine you could do it now. You'd be a lot more excited about Ma'ariv tonight. Mamish. I just want to finish this piece because it's all one hemshech. And therefore, Nikra b'shem Ziv Hashchina. That's why the world to come is called a ray of the light. It's only like a sliver, but you can understand that. But it's only a sliver. But God Himself, nobody could say, I understand God. So in the world to come, even the greatest angels, and even us, we're going to be way bigger than all the angels. You can never say, I figured out God. The world to come is going to be a world of deeper and deeper awareness of God. But you could never fully understand God. He's infinite. But we're just going to keep going forever. But here you could say, I understood God. How? Because I understood that halacha. I put on the tefillin properly. I gave tzedakah. Here you can actually say, I was toifus. I got it. I actually did it. I met God, mamish. That's Yafish Sha'achas more than all the world to come. Now you can also see why in Chabad it's stark. Get people just doing mitzvahs. Doing mitzvahs because they're going to, also learning Torah, they're going to encounter God, mamish. Kim kasher tfisa mislabeshes b'Torah mitzvayse as he tfisa ben. You can actually say, I understood the halacha. You could, and the halacha is one with God. It's the same water. It just came down here that it's available for us. Because there arises the afsha haTorah this lash of devarim tachtoinim gashmin. Even though you're going to say, man, the Torah it's like oxes and bulls and two Lamborghinis, bumping into each other and going to Beis Din on it. But that's God's will talking. And you're meeting God mamish. This is famous mashal of Tanya. He says, even though you're going to tell me, but I'm shaking the lulav. Where's God? But is that God's will? All the halachas. I'm eating matzah on Leila Seder. I'm eating kazayas matzah and pesach missing kazayas matzah. In my house, it's like silent meditation for like 15 minutes, just devekas matzah. I'm eating matzah. Look at the mashal. It's like hugging the king. Derech mashal, by way of analogy. She'ein hefresh b'mailas his cards with soivet veikusa b'melech. There's no difference in the intimate relationship, in the connection that you have to the king. Bein mechabekoi, whether you hug him, kishehu lavush echad, whether you hug him and he was wearing one garment of clothing, bein shehu lavush kama lavushim, whether he's wearing a number of layers of clothing, me'achar shaguf hamelech b'toicham, because the body of the king is inside. It doesn't make a difference. I'm hugging the king. I don't care how many layers of separation there are. I'm not hugging that, I'm hugging the king. When you take your lulav and esrog, you're hugging the king. But it looks like a bunch of foliage. It looks like the king's will is in, the king himself is in it. I'm in the sukkah. The king is hugging me. What do you mean? But there's layers. He's wearing a lot of garments. It looks like there's schach and there's wood. Don't be so coarse in the way you think. Look deep. The king himself is hugging me. I'm being hugged by the king. Whether the king hugged me with one layer or many layers on, the king hugged me. Whether the king hugged me and he's wearing a garment, there's something on his arm, there's a few layers on his arm. When the king brings you close, it's the king hugging you. By the way, being in Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah that the king is hugging you. Like we say, and your right arm is hugging me. Shuat Torah, which is the Torah. Shenatnu miyamin, shebechinas chesed amayim, which is chesed, which is mine. The Torah is like mine. Is mamish nifla. Every mitzvah you're doing, it's Hashem is mamish there. So don't get caught up but there's layers in between. The undiluted will of God had to come down and now turn into boxes. See past that. It's undiluted God will, and that's Yafish Ha'achas Ba'olam Hazeh from all of Olam Haba, because here you could meet the King Mamish. We should be zoned to this. Amen. Have a wonderful day, Kol Tov.